I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Peramang and Kaurna people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
It didn't come to us straight away, right? It went away from us or past us. And then, of course, as can happen, the wind changes direction, which happened at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and just like there was no hope, really. I mean, by that stage, the fire front was mega.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. David Bowley is the founder of Vinteloper, a wine brand located in the Adelaide Hills. An optimist at heart and gumption through his bones, David's story travels through the many highs and lows of farm life, coming out the other side with silver linings. Hi, David. Thanks for joining me.
Shanteh, it is an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I've been meaning to do it, and I'm sorry it's taken me so long, but I want to hear all about how you first got your start in wine. Tell me a little bit about your story and also where you're located in the hills.
Oh, the location part first. That's easy. So just outside of Lobethal, between Lobethal and Cuddly Creek, on top of this beautiful hill, which I guess is called Berry Hill. We're about 90 seconds. It's the fastest I've ever gone from the Lobethal Bakery to the vineyard is 90 seconds. So it's not too far. Just amazing country and beautiful. We actually have 360 degree views, but the views to the northern Adelaide Hills from our location are truly stunning. And love staring at those when we're in the Chardonnay and the Pinot blocks. But my start in wine, well, so I'm a city kid. I don't have a connection to wine. I'm first generation. But when you grow up in Adelaide, you don't have to look too far for a connection to the wine industry. I think it's 60% of Australia's wine is produced in South Australia. And so that's probably my start. My dad's good mate, Kim, has always worked in wine and in particular in the technical side of wine. I can, remember times traveling to the Barossa as a very, very young kid, like before seatbelts were a thing in cars, and smelling the wastewater treatment plants. And, Kim was not nice enough to give me a job when I was at high school. And in those days, he was importing cork from Portugal and selling cork all over Australia. And this was sort of, when was this? This was like mid-90s. So I guess screw cap wasn't what it is today. And so it was a massively busy business. And I sort of did all kinds of jobs, from unloading shipping containers to sensory analysis. And, I was like 16 and 17 years old, and I was doing sensory analysis for cork tape on these batches of cork that had come in from Portugal. So I was exposed to the wonders of the industry in those formative years, and academically I was an okay student, but I wasn't really motivated by the classic, the traditional stuff, and I just kind of thought this wine thing's super interesting, and it sort of got into me around that time. I remember like when I was like 17 or 18, after school, we went away for a summer, retreat with a few mates. Like we're like 18, I guess. I thought about this the other day. I remember taking a bottle of St. Helens Old Block and opening it, and my mates were like, what is it? I think I sat down and drank it by myself, not the whole thing, obviously. But so I guess it was in the psyche at that early stage. And that's what led to me studying onology at Adelaide University. Like I just did not have the motivation to study anything else. Chemistry and biology type subjects were my forte at school. So it was an easy move, an attractive move. And, it wasn't actually until I got to like third year and was like, this is like, none of this stuff happens in the city. You're going to have to go and work, which I did, after graduation, I went and worked in all kinds of wonderful places. And, but Loxton, among them was potentially, a pretty rough introduction to being a winemaker. But there you go. And now here we are, some 20 or so years later, I suppose, and feeling very much middle-aged.
I mean, you've really kind of started at the very bottom end by detecting cork taint and just hopefully found some things you enjoy in wine. I'm surprised that didn't completely turn you off.
Do you know what? Like we've all experienced it. It's pretty horrible, isn't it? But at Vinteloper, we still use natural cork today. So I've obviously got an affinity for the bark. But doing all that sensory analysis, I actually was like, cork's not that bad. Like we were getting, 1 or 2% cork taint across that's my memory of this stuff anyway. So, the 10 and 20% that people have talked about, I don't know. I never saw it. I was at the coalface, but I love cork as a closure. I think it's really regrettable that we have lost that part of the romance of wine, and which is why we still do it at Vinteloper. Yeah.
I'm glad that you brought it up, and it's something that we haven't really discussed before. But one of the things that I loved about wine was the ceremony of opening a bottle. And I remember watching my father do it, and it seemed like this crazy kind of surgery, when you're a young kid going, what are you doing with that? And even to this day, I'm amazed when I go to someone's house and they've got these crazy, huge, I don't even know what they are, but there's some kind of ridiculous thing for opening corks. And you just think, well, all you need is a wine knife. But I kind of fell in love with corks because I loved the story. I remember being young and reading about wine and reading about Portugal and being like, what, that substance comes from a tree? And I've got, a big cork stool in my house. I've kept a lot of corks. I still have a bit of an affinity for them. I just don't particularly like the ones that taint the wine.
Yeah, that's fair. How many screw caps have you kept? Did you have you see those people who have bowls of corks that they've collected? How many people have a bowl of screw caps? I think, it says it all, doesn't it?
It does, actually. And I think, like you said, when you're selective about natural cork, you tell me, this is not about me, this podcast, so I need to stop talking, but tell me what you like about using natural cork and kind of how it affects the wine.
Well, I think there's two factors at play. Like it's about the product itself, right? So we don't use it in every bottle of Vinteloper. In fact, it's used in a select few, but the select few that it is used in are the wines that have or deserve ceremony. And I think that's why. To break it down, like sure, like these days, you can buy corks that have been analysed to weed out the ones that have a taint in them. So they sort of guarantee these taint-free corks. They're very expensive, but they're, for me, they're worthwhile. But putting that aside for a moment, we choose to use them on those wines because I say we a lot. It's me, isn't it really? But it's the royal we. We feel that the real ceremony and the real feeling of pulling that cork and what it represents about that wine is worth so much more than taking the risk of having one or two bottles that are not up to the standard. It's for me, it's a very easy equation. How does it affect the wine? In my experience, wines that are under cork age much more quickly, shall we say? I think wines that are under screw cap just are sort of stuck in time in a lot of ways. The maturation of those wines is so slow. So slow. We've got '08 Shiraz and '09 Shiraz in bottle under screw cap. You can open them and they're great. They're wonderful. They're still fruit forward and rich. And equally, we've got 2012 Odeon Pinots under cork, and they're mature and developing and super interesting as well. So I think it's a nice mix. I don't want this to turn into a let's all go back to cork podcast, but I do have a bit of love for the bark, as I said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is that selection of kind of what do we want to do with this wine and how do we want people to see it. And there's certainly, like you said, there's a bit of a shock that happens when wine first goes in the bottle. And if you're kind of popping a screw cap on that and then people are opening it, ready to drink, it's like, well, actually, that cork and that slight ingress of oxygen might just help to kind of get that wine settled a little bit. And then when someone's going to pull it off a shelf and drink it straight away, they have that added benefit of it, like you said, maturing that little bit faster. So I think that just the decision making around it is really important. And I'm glad you brought it up. And we've taken a total left turn, but I love it. Let's go back. Tell me a little bit about your Wine Australia job.
Oh, wow. Well, I was the policeman for Australian Wine for a few years. That'd be the easiest way to put it. So,
did you get a handgun with that?
Oh, no. I was pretty young. That would have been a bit silly. So why did I want to work for Wine Australia? It's probably a good place to start. So I was 24, I guess. Still playing basketball. Trying to play basketball at a high level, in order to do that, I really needed to live in a metro area. So this opportunity came up. I was a qualified winemaker. They were looking for someone who was, who knew their way around a winery and who knew the technical ins and outs of wine, who could go and check up on winemakers and make sure that they were doing what they said they were doing. So. Yeah, I was the auditor, technical auditor for Wine Australia for 6 years, I guess. Yeah, 2005 to the end of 2010. And it was the boom time of Australian wine. We're like, man, exports were massive. They were growing every year. Wine Australia had sort of not unlimited budget, but it just was like booming, right? And I just traveled around and looked at people's winemaking records and tasted wines and made sure that everyone was, vintage variety and region. Everyone was following the rules, which, fortunately, Australia's wine industry is really not full of crooks. So everyone was doing the right thing. So from that perspective, it was a pretty easy job. And the quality credentials of Australian wine is such that, you need to make wine from vintage variety and region in order for it to be good. So that was easy from that perspective. But the great thing that job allowed me to do was to taste thousands of different wines a year. This is back in the day when every wine that got exported from Australia had to be tasted by a panel, had to be assessed by a panel and approved for export. And I wasn't on the panel, but I was close to the panel. I was involved in the panel, the tastings, and I was able to taste. So every single day, Monday to Friday, there would be 80 to 100 wines set up in the lab at Wine Australia, and these people would come in and taste them and tick them off. And at the end of it, I could go in there and taste any of the 80 to 100 wines I wanted and make my own notes. And often would be required to do that if there was a wine that didn't get the tick of approval. Often it was my job to communicate with the winemaker about why. So the point of the story being I got exposed to just thousands of wines and figured out what wines made were great from where and what regions were doing what. And that was a real fast track to learning about, and developing a palate. Yeah.
Wow, what a time to what a time to be involved. That's crazy. Tell me a little bit about how Vinteloper got started.
Well, it's an extension of that story, I guess. So tasting all these wines, I was like, man, I can make better wines than this. These wines are all getting exported out of the country. People are obviously buying them, and I think I could do better. And that thought simmered away for a couple of years. And after a few years working in the office in the corporate environment, I figured out that it wasn't for me at all. And the basketball career wasn't going to go anywhere. So that was off the table. And so this, sprouts started to grow around this idea of making wine again and going back to winemaking. But having not been in the winemaking game for a few years and being the policeman of wine, I didn't fancy my chances of getting a job anywhere. So I thought, I can do this. I can do this better. And I wrote a business plan on the back of an envelope and was like, yeah, I can do this, definitely. And it was right around this time that I met my now wife, Sharon, and she's an Adelaide girl too. She was in Adelaide, but she made it known to me that she didn't intend to stay in Adelaide for very much longer, and that if I planned to stick around with her, I might want to think about a way that I could also not stick around in Adelaide. So, I was 27, 28 years old. Right? How much freedom and how much spare time did I have? I had no idea. Did I? So I sort of took the plunge in 2008, made a couple of wines, and that was good, eye-opening, interesting, seemed easy enough, great. Hadn't started selling them yet. 2009, make a couple more. And then come the end of 2009, start selling them. And you're like, oh, yeah, right. Okay. Things are a bit harder than that business plan sort of led you to believe, but carried on and the small steps of Vinteloper starting through 2008 and 2009, they were terrifying, but it was so inspiring, right? I'd been in the Wine Australia environment for like five years at this stage, and this was and that was the place where the job was the job, right? There wasn't a lot of creativity there. There wasn't a lot of exploration, and all of a sudden, the side hustle had all those things, and it had the freedom, and it had the expression, and it had the risk. And it was just like so tantalizing, and away we went.
Tell me a little bit about where Pinot Palooza came into the mix there.
Yeah, great question. When did Pinot? I feel like Pinot Palooza goes back a long way, and we actually weren't involved in the first couple as a producer. I went living in Melbourne at the time, and I remember going down to the basement of Prince St Kilda, and it was like a 35-degree day. Dan would recall the story too. It was a tough day for Pinot, but I remember seeing the crowd and just being like, wow, this is wild. All these people are dead keen on Pinot, and so we've got to, as I was having spent time making Pinot and studying it, and it's my great love in wine. Just thought we've got to get involved in this, and so. Yeah, we chased it pretty hard to be involved in Pinot Palooza as an Adelaide Hills representative, and I guess things really, really took off in 2014 or 15. I think when we just we had a banging selection of wines. The 2014 white label that we had is still maybe one of the best white labels we've released, and people just loved it, and it was so unique. And the vineyards we've been working with since 2010 probably really shone through in that vintage. And, to win one People's Choice, back in those days, they had People's Choice Award in sort of in each city, and we just kept bloody winning them. And I don't know how. I mean, I thought the wines were great, and we're just real people telling real stories about how we've made them and why we love them. But, to win in Adelaide, I was like, lots of people in Adelaide know us and they know who we are and they know me personally. So yeah, that's cool. Like a few free votes there. But then, to win in Sydney was massive. And then we won it in Melbourne as well, with Mornington and the Yarra right there. I was like, oof. There's something about what we're doing. It must be hitting the chord here. So, I guess it's an event that we still love today because, Dan and his team do just a fantastic job connecting people with wine. But when it comes to Pinot Palooza with Pinot, and it's what wine's actually all about, right? Like it's about having a good time. It's about being there as a celebration, lubricant, as a moment, as a thing to acknowledge those great moments in life. And so that's what they do so well. And that's why we love being there and just pouring wine for people and chatting. And you can tell I'm a talker, can't you? So, yeah, it's awesome.
I agree. And I think that I still remember going to Pinot Palooza, just as somebody that paid for a ticket, and maybe I didn't pay, but anyway, but just looking at winemakers, really firsthand interaction and the delight on people being like, oh, you make this, oh, you own this place. Like it's so, there's just cutting out so much of the middleman. And I think that is amazing. And I could see the energy being transferred from people, just loving what was happening, and then that influencing the winemaker to be like, this is actually really fun, and I often think about when people talk about what they want out of their life or, what makes them content. People often tell a story about sitting on a veranda with a glass of wine, watching their kids play or whatever it may be. And I think, why do they always kind of bring up that particular imagery? But I think it's because wine does make you stop and in the moment and enjoy it and savor things. And you've really kind of hit the nail on the head with that. So talking about the wonderful parts of being a winemaker, tell me about when you first bought your property in 2018.
Oh, well, I always said I wouldn't own a vineyard and proved myself wrong. And so because Vinteloper was a virtual brand, right, like for a decade, and that was the way that I structured the business, was like, going to buy grapes, going to make wine, going to have a good brand. It's going to be wild. But now, and that worked really well, right, for a decade. But after a while, it starts to wear thin, and you do these events like Pinot Palooza, or you do a tasting in a wine store, or you come to Key and catch up with you, and the question is, so where's your winery or where's your vineyard? Right. Like 100% of the time, that is the question that people ask you. And after 8 or so years of saying, oh, well, we don't actually own a vineyard, we just buy grapes from growers and, blah, blah, blah. Like after you've said that a few thousand times, it starts to sink in that, actually the real magic of what we do is you grow grapes and they come from a place and you make those into wine, and then they're not repeatable. No one else can make that wine because it comes from your piece of land and your dirt, and it's your blood, sweat and tears that goes into that. So even though I said I'd never buy a vineyard, I actually sort of started to realize. And so the Adelaide Hills is my place. It's, as much as I said I'm a city kid, the Hills was the closest place, and spent a lot of time around the Hills, and it's the place for Pinot, right? Like that's what I'm obsessed with, as I've already said. So just started the search for a vineyard to enhance Vinteloper and to take it to the next level. And it took a few. We looked at a few, had to be the right size, had to have the right varieties, had to be in the right part of the hills, and so they don't come up all that often, really. But we found this beautiful 30 hectares. It was it was like the worst house on the best street kind of scenario. The vineyard was very run down, riddled with blackberries and a host of other issues. But every person I spoke to within the industry, people I respect and have worked with and alongside and know, said, "Oh yeah, I know that vineyard. Yeah, yeah, it could be one of the best vineyards in the hills." Like we took fruit off that vineyard a long time ago, and it was bloody amazing. But it needs this, this, and this. So I had a lot of confidence that this was the one, and we were able to get it over the line. And that took a settlement was just after the 2018 harvest, and from that moment, it was the 1st of April 2018. We just set about renovating the worst house in the best street, and for the next 18 months. That's what we did, thousands of hours. And it was, we're going to get to it, I'm sure. But the real shame of, the next part we'll talk about is that by mid-December 2019, it was actually just like looking incredible. And I was like, look at everything we've achieved. And I was so excited for the 2020 harvest.
And this is when you stopped sleeping, I imagine.
Yeah. I stopped sleeping from the end of September 2018 when Jensen was born. But this really took it to the next level.
I think, so much of what we talk about is this unfortunate event. And I don't want to necessarily dwell too much on it because I don't think it defines your label or who you are. But it certainly is a rebirth story. So tell me about the disastrous bushfires.
Fundamentally, we live in the Adelaide Hills, grow grapes in Adelaide Hills. It's a bushfire-prone area, so these things can happen. Mid to late December 2019, multiple days in a row of 44 degrees or thereabouts and above. And on this particular Friday, which is the last working Friday of the year, it was a really, really hot day, like 44 degrees, and it was windy. The other days preceding it hadn't been that windy, but this was the one. This was the powder keg day. And so I was super nervous. We were living in Melbourne at the time, and I had travelled back to Adelaide because of the weather. Because of the risk, and I wanting to be close if anything did happen. And so I sat in my mate's cafe down the hill, and at 9:30 in the morning, got a notification that there was a fire in the hills on that day, and I was like, "Oh, this is not good." And the fire started quite close to our property, but it burnt in a southerly direction all day, and it didn't come to us straight away, right? It went away from us or past us. And then, of course, as can happen, the wind changes direction, which happened at about 4:30 in the afternoon. And just like, there was no hope really. I mean, by that stage, the fire front was mega, and it was so close to our property that it came and got us. And it was a fire that burnt 95% of our property, really. So 95% of our vines. It's been well documented, I guess, and shared. Unfortunately, the house on our property was a victim to the fire, and vineyards all around us. I think 1/3 of the planted area of the Adelaide Hills was burnt, of the vineyard planted area, and certainly even more smoke affected. So it was a really bad scenario on face value, and look, a really bad scenario. But I'm not naive enough to not understand that there were over 80 homes destroyed in those fires in the hills and on KI over that period, and we're really badly affected. But so many people lost everything. We had the ability to bounce back, I guess. And I guess that's the story. I mean, it was a horrible time. I'll never forget it. But yeah, got up in the next morning, like dawn, and tried to get to the property, couldn't get there. The police had roadblocks in the way on the main road, but the kind policeman said to me, "We've got roadblocks, you can't get in, but wink, wink, if you happen to know a back way, that road might not be blocked." So I do know a back, of course. So I went the back way to try and get there, and this is a memory that will stay with me forever. Like, the trees on the side of the road were on fire, and there was ash all over the road, and it was dawn, and it was silent, right? Because there's no animals, like no birds, nothing, because they're all like, everything's on fire. And it was so eerie, Shanteh. Like, there was no other cars on the road. There was ash all over the road. So there was just, it was actually terrifying. So I didn't get to the property. I decided, I've got a 1-year-old at home. I've got to think about other things. So I turned around and I didn't get to the property until late the next day. But pretty monumental moments, really.
When you talk about it, all I can kind of conjure in my mind are just, the movies and the things you see. But I just think, sound of crackling fire, and then, like you said, that eerie feeling. It must have been just such I hope a once in a lifetime experience that you'll never see again. But we hear these stories in Australia, and I live in bushland. It isn't, that will never happen to me. It is very much a reality that could happen to so many people. And I'm really glad to hear that you were thinking of your family and thought, you know what, I don't know if I need to do this right now. That's very nice to hear. But what do you ever talk yourself out of not dwelling on what you lost? How do you move on from that?
How do you move on from that? It's a big question. I think I'm always reluctant to tell this story because I don't want to get it wrong. But are you familiar with the fable of the farmer and the horse? So in the fable, there's a Chinese farmer, but I'm not sure why that's relevant. But you imagine a poor farmer who has a horse, and the horse is the lifeblood of the farm, and living in difficult times. And one day, like a storm comes and the stables are destroyed, and the horse escapes and runs away, and people are like, "Oh, such a tragedy! You've lost your horse. What are you going to do?" And the farmer says, "Oh, we'll see." And then the next day, the horse returns and brings with it 3 wild horses, and everyone in the village says, "Wow, that's amazing. Now you had 1 horse, now you've got 4. That's so great. What are you going to do?" And the farmer says, "Oh, we'll see." And then the next day, the farmer's son is trying to break in these wild horses, gets thrown off, breaks his leg, and can't work on the farm. And everyone in the village says, "Oh, what a tragedy. Your son's got a broken leg. That's horrible. What's going to happen?" And the farmer says, "We'll see." And then the next day, the authorities are coming around conscripting all the men to go and fight in a war. But because his son has a broken leg, he doesn't get conscripted. And everyone, and so on the story goes, right? And so I think that's something that was shared with me not long after the fire as being like, we don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. We just don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. And I try to remember that.
Wow. I mean, I've known a couple of people that have lost their homes in fires, my stepfather and his family, and someone I dated a long time ago. And I was always amazed at some of the life lessons I think that it taught them, and not something you want anyone to go through. But I suppose, we are resilient people, and we have to find a way to, see what's coming. And we don't know. Each new day can bring something so new. You're so right. And that's why it's worth waking up every day to see what's going to happen. Tell me a little bit about the restoration and how you went about restoring your vines, the cottage, all of that.
The vines, to start with, that was our primary focus from the beginning. That's the engine room of the property, and the whole reason for buying the property, right, was that we've got a wine business and we want to grow grapes and make wine from them. So, I think when your entire vineyard burns to the ground, unfortunately, no one hands you a playbook and says this is what you need to do. So there was a lot of figuring it out, lots of reading, learning, researching. And the other thing that that comes up a lot in this circumstance is every fire is different. So yes, other vineyards have burnt before, but that fire was different because of this, and that, or that vineyard was different because of this, and that. So, unfortunately, it was a lot of learning it for the first time. In practical terms, what we chose to do was, because the intensity of the fire through our vineyard was so extreme, and you could see that from the damage, we chose to cut every vine. We had 30,000 vines, right? We chose to cut every vine off at the bottom of the trunk, close to the ground, on the assumption that anything that's underground is probably not fire affected. Obviously, everything above ground was fire affected, so we had to remove all the wires. I mean, anything that was left of the irrigation, which was basically nothing. Anything that was left of posts, which was, who knows? I mean, there were some posts left, but there were a lot that were just gone forever. So I'd clean up mission, and then following that, a multi-year mission of cutting off every vine at the ground, and then reinstating all the trellis and reinstating all the irrigation, and then training up new vines as if I guess it's as if you've planted a new vineyard, but you've got, the 30-year-old root system as the engine driving those new vines, that new vine growth. So the vines that did grow back grew strong, very strong. But there was a lot of mortality as well. I would say it's 25% mortality. Each block is a little bit different. So yeah, it's thousands of hours, right? Of anyone who's done vine training and any kinds of vineyard work and refurbishment, it's just thousands of hours. I mean, the cost of the materials is known. That is what it is. Every post is $20 and every roll of wire is whatever, but it's the hours that it takes to do all that. That's where it really adds up. So it took us quite a few years. We expected it to take that amount of time, but it really did. And now, I mean, it continues today, right? So the team are out there today putting layers in the ground to replace the gaps where that 25% mortality exists. And that will continue season after season, I expect, for probably 5 more years. But it's worthwhile. I mean, we made wines off of the block from the 2024 vintage. We got a tiny yield from the 2023 vintage. And I got to tell you, those are the wines I'm the most proud of ever. They're not our most expensive wines. It's our 2024 rosé is 100% estate grown. I never thought I'd be brimming with pride having made a rosé, but I think it's pretty exceptional in this case.
Were there times during the last few years where you thought, I don't know if I can keep going? I don't know if I can do this?
Every week, probably. Yeah, 100%. So many times, Shanteh. So many times. But there comes a point where you've just committed. Like in poker poker terms, it's called pop committed. You've put in so much that like you can't fold your hand now. You've just got to see it to the end and hope that you hit that miracle river and that you win.
Sorry, it makes me feel emotional. It's crazy. How did the community rally around? I mean, I know there's been many fires since then and through the hills. Like you said, this is not a one-off, but I'm sure that how were the reactions of people around you and did they chip in to help?
Yes, they definitely did. I mean, I could talk for ages about this. So many people have contributed to our recovery over the years. But, a few examples that spring to mind are, the wonderful crew at Longview and Gemtree and Oliver Stranger. The guys at Longview, gave us some grapes to make wine out of in the 2020 season, and the same Gemtree, like guys like Velocity Vineyard, and of course so many other vineyards were impacted. Like you couldn't just go down the road and find another grower because there was just such an impact on everyone that there was a brief period of time where it looked like we wouldn't make any wine at all. In that season, I've got to give a special mention to, my good friends, Pete Dredge and Dan Stocker. Peter and Dan got together opposite sides of the country, Pete in Tasmania, Dan in Margaret River, and they were like, we're going to make some wine and we're going to send it to you and you can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it, you can blend it, you can whatever you like. And I mean, pretty moving that they would think to do that. And awesome, because I think what we ended up doing with those wines was, in the case of Pete with the Tassie Pinot, we made some Hills Pinot and we blended a Hills Tassie Pinot blend, and that was a limited release, and maybe one of the most successful limited releases we've ever done. And the same with Dan. And so, yeah, like to get the community support from the wine community was incredible. And then from the local community too, with the cleanup effort, like people were just turning up and like with gloves on, ready to clean stuff up. And
that's amazing. So what's next for you? What's on the kind of radar? And what is the best way to support, someone like yourself? I mean, I'm always telling people to go to the website, go straight to the source, buy wine off the website. I mean, in this case, I think buy that 2024 rosé. That's something you want to have and keep and tell the story. But how do people support, small wineries like yourself?
Well, yeah, patronage. Nothing supports better than, taking a bottle of their wine and putting it in on your wine rack. It's a win-win, isn't it? Because they get the support of you buying their wines, and you get the benefit of having such a great product that you can splash around in the glass and enjoy and talk over and tell stories about. And what's next for us is, I don't know when this will go to air, but pretty soon, I guess. And at the end of September, we'll open our own cellar door and on our property and overlooking, what was just, the vines we've just been talking about. The restored cottage, reimagined as a tasting room and as a touch point for Vinteloper. And I think, if people want to support us, come and visit us and experience what, our values and how we want to share our stories through the touch point of a tasting room and a cellar door.
That is going to be one heck of a celebration. And I hope that is just fireworks for you guys, like just the best day ever. It's really exciting. And I just think you are the real lifeblood of Vinteloper and the brand. And you will continue to tell your story and keep going to make all the great things that you do. But I've absolutely loved hearing the story from yourself as well, because no one tells it quite like you do.
Yeah, no, that's true. But no one else has lived it like I have. So yeah, it's always fun to share, and it's fun to chat about these things and reflect as well on the journey.
Yeah, and I just think, there are so many wine brands out there and we're spoiled for choice. And I just think when you hear stories like yourself and you go to make that selection, you realize just how powerful it can be when we consume things anyway, but when we make choices about what and where and how, we can really affect people's lives. And so, I'm so glad that you guys are in a really good place, and I hope really good things are to come. I do want to ask you, if you could only drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, what would they be and why? What would David Bowley drink?
Great question. Yeah. So are you accepting non-alcoholic beverages?
You can do whatever you like.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to have to put coffee in there. That's all. Yeah, because I have 3 kids under the age of 5, but also there's so much synergy between the world of coffee and the world of wine that you can really dive deep. And I have dove very deep into coffee. So coffee for me is on the list. Pinot is top of the list, actually. Just give me a bottle or a glass of Pinot at any time of the day or night, and I'm yours for as long as it takes. I love analyzing. I love enjoying. I love learning. And then, there's always a moment for a glass of lovely, high quality whiskey. Yep, I'm a whiskey guy as well. So, from all over the world again. It takes you places. All those three beverages have a lot in common, don't they? I feel like the complexity of all 3 is mind blowing, and there's so much to learn from every cup of coffee you have that's a good one, and from every glass of Pinot that you have, and from every nick of whiskey or every bottle of whiskey. So, yeah, if you had to narrow me down to 3, which is hard, those are my 3.
I love that. And they also take you right through the day. So, you can get your coffee up until lunchtime. Pinot will take you right through, and then whiskey can take you through to the early hours of the morning and start over again. So very, very clever.
That is a day I want to have. Sign me up for that.
David, it's been real. It's been humbling and awe-inspiring. Thank you so much for your time today. I've loved hearing your stories. I've loved hearing more about you as well and your palate. And I've been just loved your wine since a very long time ago, and I still do to this day. And I'm going to get my hands on some rosé very shortly. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for yours. It's been a real honor to talk to you. Big fan of the pod, and especially to be amongst the other alumni. It's pretty humbling for me. So thank you.
Cheers to you. This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.